My name is Alexis. For those who don't know me, the Chief Operating Officer of Choose Love and part co-host of the book club, along with my mom, Pam.
Nice to see everybody. Hi, Steve.
Thank you
Hi
so much
there.
for
How are we?
Good. Oh, so great to have you. And now I'm wishing I was at your background.
Yeah, well, actually, me too. That's why I put it up.
I love it. Well, I loved your book so much. Oh my gosh, I just couldn't put it down. I think I finished this book so quick. I mean, one of the quickest books I finished. I was so impressed, and it made me think about lighthouses in my life, and it's very thought-provoking book. But usually, just for those of you that are new tonight, we go around, we ask questions, do question and answer. Feel free to jump in or use the hand emoticon if you'd like, or put questions in the chat and we can read it out. But we'd love to hear from you, Steve, and just get started, and the inspiration for the book. I know you wrote a previous book as well, but what prompted you to put together these stories in this book?
Well, first, thank you for having me. I love book clubs. It is my favorite thing to do, in all honesty. Not the kind of big mega conferences. I just like that they're smaller and we get to talk about one of the great loves that I have, which is books. Which, if you've read either book, you pick that up, pretty quickly. Interestingly enough, there were 10 years between the books, because my day-to-day life is I am a writer, but it's not how I make a living. And so when A Chance in the World took on this life of its own, I really thought that book was what I intended it to be, which was just, a family history, really. And I learned pretty quickly that it was this more universal story that impacts and touch all of our lives. So what I didn't realize it did, though, was it also was an invitation for other people to share their stories with me. And I think it's true for any of us. You share your story, your journey, not the labels that we are, but our journey, how we come to be who we are. And invariably, you are writing a chapter of somebody else's life, and you don't know it. And that became clear to me as the book unfolded. So it becomes a bestseller, and it's a movie, and all these things. I wasn't trying to do any of that. So when my agent was asking me, what do you want to write next? The real answer was, I don't know. I don't know what I want to write about. I knew I did not want to write about me again, though, because I didn't think it was that exceptional, to be honest. I was like, hey, I appreciated the support. I appreciated all of that. And then I was on my way to Providence College to deliver the commencement address for the class of 2019. And I've been asked to deliver a lot of commencement addresses over the years, and it's always a challenge, because the best thing really a commencement speaker can do is like be brief and be gone. I mean, that's what a commencement speaker's job is: be out of there, right? So I'm thinking to myself, I don't really know how I'm going to make this different. So I'm driving from Boston to Providence, and I'm thinking about how I can make it different. And as I'm driving down, and I see lighthouses that kind of go along the coastline, and I literally called the organizers and I said, hey, this is what I want to do. I want to go out amongst the graduates. I want to get their stories, and I want to share them as part of the commencement address. What did you major in? What are you going to go do? Who is here to see you graduate? And so in the Lighthouse, to me, was the first time I ever talked publicly about it. Well, after the president of Providence College comes over to me and he says, I've been at this university for 34 years. That's only the second standing ovation that I've seen in 34 years. So at that point, I knew that there was something more universal about that, all of our stories, and how the lighthouse itself, the physical structure that is the lighthouse, is a perfect manifestation of all of our lives. So then lastly, I said, I want to write about these people who I encountered along my life journey, who I met at different stages in my life, as a young boy, a younger man, and I wanted to tell their stories and how their stories intersected with mine at very, very specific times. And they taught me something really important. And I thought that they could teach us all something important.
That is amazing. I mean, and I just want to say something you just did. I picked up on, you were talking about your first book, and I know some people might not have read your first book, but you said it was nothing exceptional, but I think it was outstandingly exceptional. You went through a lot. You had such I don't want to say the word extraordinary childhood of how, you were, the families you were with, and the pain and heartbreak and loneliness and abuse that you went through was very, it was such a journey that you went on. And I recommend that book to any of you to read it. I mean, I practically read it in one sitting. It was just so captivating. And I wanted to know where you ended up. And it was amazing because then when I read this book, The Lighthouse Effect, I was able to read about more people that you had mentioned in that book. And it was great. It was like, I know them. I felt like I knew them through you. And, from what you went through was just very, it was very inspiring to see what a child of, like from what you experienced to where you are now. It was just so mesmerizing to me. And I mean, this is wonderful that you recognized who these lighthouses, they were your lighthouses, Claire and John, you didn't even realize it. I think at the time they were there to help you and move you to your next point. And it's nice how that you pulled them back into these stories. Do you feel people nowadays or from your experience don't really see, these ordinary people and what they're doing for them until later on, and that we're not always keying in on that this person could be my lighthouse or they're helping me with this? What is your take on that?
Yeah, great question. Much like the lighthouse itself, there's many attributes. There's many human attributes of the lighthouse, or lighthouse attributes in humans, depending on how one thinks about it. One of my favorites, in all honesty, is that the lighthouse never really knows who sees it. The lighthouse does not know who it's touching, who it's impacting, who draws example from their courage, their conviction, their strength. I feel that way about Scarlett. Didn't know her prior to us connecting here. Certainly was very, very aware, as we all were, right, of what happened at Sandy Hook. And there's just a certain kind of awe I have, I guess you might describe it, for me anyway, awe I have of her in responding that way, to choose love. That makes you pause for a moment and think about any difficulty you're going through. And it really makes you wonder, could I have handled that the same way? And now the real answer to that is you don't know, because you've not been asked to. But she was, and that's how she's responded. And the reach of that is not possible to calculate in one's lifetime. There's this great Greek proverb that says a society grows great when the elders of that society plant trees in whose shade they know they will never sit. We really don't get to see exactly how our example of strength and conviction and bravery and courage and healing, who sees that, who is touched and impacted by that. I do think that the relentless polarization of this country, the cynicism aided and abetted by social media platform that invites snarkiness and disagreement, and it's costing us a great deal, I would argue, in terms of our national character. It's costing us a great deal in terms of connection. And yet, I think, especially as Americans, we're yearning to find that again. We're yearning to find, and we're also, in an intuitive way, cognizant that it is not going to come from the quote unquote extraordinary people. you know, the famous, the wealthy, the well-known. I know quite a few of these folks. Quite a few of them make these Faustian bargains to get on those platforms. They're not who they say they are in all candor. They're not. And so I'm not convinced that those are really the people we should be idolizing anyway. My general feeling about it. So then who do you look to, right? Who is your lighthouse? And you realize that it's the people who were kind of part of your journey all along, that elementary school teacher who gave you that message about what your possibilities were, the high school coach, the first boss, you know, somebody who, as time in life moves on, you realize that the interaction may have been temporary, but the effect is not. And the older we get, the more reverence we have, because we realize I wouldn't have the friends that I do if it weren't for that person, that interaction. I wouldn't be married to whom I'm married. I wouldn't be parent to who I'm parent to. It's because of the things they said. And most times they are the quiet, humble, seemingly ordinary people who are indeed having an extraordinary impact. And lastly, I'd say it's this recalibration of society that is so necessary, because the stories that I have encountered, that's where my hope in a better world comes from. It doesn't come from what I see on the television or on a sports field. It comes from the everyday people in communities who, much like the 10 people I wrote about, always often have to deal with something very difficult, very challenging. And the way in which they respond to it, though, is to me instructive for all of us.
Yeah, I think that's so interesting. And I know my mom and I were talking about that. You know, the people that you chose were just so interesting. The different ages, the different walks of life. I just love that. I feel like you can kind of, I don't know, everybody I feel like can relate to at least someone in the book. What made you choose these particular people, and how did you interview them? Like, how did it all come about?
Yeah, well, one, that's a great observation, because that was quite purposeful. Because in a way, I wanted to speak to communities. When I was writing, for example, about F.L. Kirby, I wanted to highlight the men and women who go off to war to defend this country, the enormous sacrifices that they take on to do so, and the scars which they so often bear quietly. And FL was a way to do that. But I was thinking about the veterans community. When I was writing about my beloved John, I was thinking about teachers specifically, because John, I think, wrestled with whether, as teachers often do, they wrestle with whether or not they're having an impact. And that was my way of saying, through telling John's story, yes, you are. When I was writing about my uncle Greg, I was writing that chapter was for those who have been orphaned, as he was, through no fault of their own, had done nothing wrong. When I was writing about Wells Crowther, I was writing about an extraordinary selflessness in saving people on the morning of 9/11 and losing his own life in the process. And how Boston College, where I went to school, he went to school, where my oldest son currently goes to school, how these universities in the Northeast in particular honored so many of their alumni who perished that morning. And just kind of on and on it goes. R.J. Pete, who at 3 years old received he and his family received the diagnosis of autism. And I was trying to deliver a message to the disability community. Wells Crowther was about firefighters and the sacrifices they make. And all of them are kind of people that are all around us. You know, they're in our communities, they're our friends and colleagues, and yet they live on these kind of slightly higher planes to me that needed elevation. And so I was very, very purposeful about their professions, their lives, and how they responded to some difficulty. For Monica and Rajiv, who lost their daughter to a mental health crisis. That's tough. That was a tough one to write. I remember I was actually going through the drive-through, and my initial audience for my books is my wife. So I'll read to her what I'm writing. And I remember I was in the passenger seat. We were going through the Dunkin' Donuts drive-through, and as I was reading Monica and Rajiv's story of these two immigrants came to America and lost their daughter, in part because they felt that they wondered if they had so chased the American dream that they hadn't seen what was happening to their daughter, and that was not the case, but they felt it. I remember I couldn't get through it. It was, it was very emotional because, you love these people, you come to love them. And when you're telling their stories, you're right there with them. You're right there. I mean, I felt like I was on the 78th floor of the South Tower with Wells. And I'm with Rick Rock when his father has a heart attack and he's 16 years old. And I'm with Carmen when she's sitting in the car at the DMV and her mother tells her, your father is not who I told you your father was. You're with those folks, in those moments. You're feeling what they're feeling and experiencing what they're, because to write it well, you have to do that, but there's this universality, as you rightly point out, that their stories have, because their stories really are our stories.
That's so beautiful. Thank you for describing. I think, the empathy that comes through in your writing is so vivid that, you really do feel it. You feel like you're like right there with them while you're capturing their stories. And I think it's just so remarkable. Would anyone else want to jump in with a question or a comment? I know we had a few people reaching out in the chat. I'd like to jump in and say something.
I can't turn my camera on because it will, if I turn my camera on, you won't be able to hear me. So I apologize for that. But I love this, and I loved how you were just talking about teachers not sure if they're making an impact. Mm-hmm. And it's something that I struggle with as a teacher of over 20 years, because what I want my impact to be is emotional. And then there's so much curriculum that it's hard to balance it. But in my heart, I know that in the end, it's the emotional part that they'll remember. Oh, yeah. So listening to you, I'm like, I want to go with my heart. And then I get all this curriculum stuff that I'm supposed to do. But in my heart, I know that, so I appreciate listening to you.
Well, Colleen, I would tell you that the curriculum, and no matter how wonderfully crafted it is, the curriculum is always going to be the numerator compared to the impact, the emotional impact that you're having. And here's how I know that, because the book was published in late September. And Colleen, I've asked a lot of people, as you can imagine, across the globe. So who are your lighthouses? A teacher is always in the top 3. Always. Yep. Yep. I have not met a person yet who has not put a teacher in their top 3. We all do. Yep. And John, John had that same, in fact, John, and I was trying to capture in John's story exactly what you described. So he graduates from college, goes right to the classroom, and because he's not thinking he's having an impact, he leaves. I want to chase adventure, so I'm going to go out to California and I'm going to be a ski instructor. Yep. And I loved when he told me, I said, well, what was that moment when you're in California chasing adventure as a ski instructor? What was that moment? When did it hit you? And he didn't pause a beat. He says, early in the morning, and I'm up on a mountain making snow. And I can look down into the valley and I see the school bus winding through. And I see parents pick up, and he says, in that moment, I realized this is not where I'm supposed to be. I'm not supposed to be on this mountain making
Yep.
snow. Now, I shared that because that moment on that mountain is what brought John to me.
Yep.
See, that's what
Yes.
brought him to me.
Yeah. Yeah. I thank you. I totally, yes, I feel that so much. And I'm always like, "Oh, I know I'm doing the right thing, but then I feel like I'm not, but I know I am, but it's like a struggle. Like, so that's why I love, well, actually, like you talked about Scarlett, it's probably a huge thing that drew me to Scarlett is, and her lessons is that this is the most important possible thing we could teach children
Yes.
is how to be.
Yeah, choose love.
Mm.
I love that, Colleen, and I'm so sorry that I'm late and therefore my mom is late. I apologize. Hi, Steve.
Hi, Steve. Nice to meet you.
And the same. How are you?
Here's your book.
I love that both of you have the little tabs in it. As a writer, I can't tell you how great that is. That tells me that it's probably no two compliments that authors love is one, when people write in the books or do what you've done, and the second is when they get through it quickly. Those are the best compliments any writer could ask for.
Yeah.
Yeah,
It was a
it-
fantastic book.
so fantastic. And all the things that I have highlighted are just everything that we teach in Choose Love, and all of our values. They're the exact same as yours, Steve. I can't say enough. And I wanted you to know that we both wore these red bandanas for
Isn't that great?
Wells.
Yeah, that's
That was
wonderful.
an amazing story.
Yeah.
Oh yeah, that every time I go, I'm on the board of trustees at Boston College, so I'm there often, and I always stop by the labyrinth that I described
Right.
for all of us. And his story has been told often, actually, a documentary. And so again, you have that same task of how do you write about him differently? And but I realize that of all the things that have been written about him, no one had uncovered why he chose Boston College. Like, why did he choose that school? Especially because he's not Catholic, and neither am I. And we both chose Boston College. And it was asking his mother that question that unlocked this whole other dimension of him and how the university has honored his life. So Linden Lane, that I went into great detail on, you can feel his presence in that place. It's just very, very special, special young man, special young man.
What was it about that lane? Because it had the same effect on you. Just driving down that road, entering the school, right?
Yes.
Something about it.
Well, it's the first thing is that you're driving past it. It is tree lined, majestic trees that almost feel like they're sequoias, and on the other side of them are these beautiful Gothic buildings. And it's a lane of about 800 yards, so it goes down quite a ways. And at the end of the lane, which you can see from 800 yards away, is the university moniker of the eagle that sits atop a column. And so everything about it just screams college, right? This is where I'm supposed to be. But there's a certain kind of feeling of sanctuary that the trees provide shade. And so you, on the one hand, you feel that you're in this bit of nature. I mean, you're aware, but you're aware there's a structure around you, but there is a certain kind of quietness and reflectiveness that whether you're 18 as he was when he chose Boston College, or now and it just kind of speaks to you.
Mhm.
Ironically, when Boston College, it's a very tight footprint in terms of the physical plant of the place. So they're debating long and hard. Well, where are we going to put this? Where are we going to put this memorial to the to our alumni who we lost in 9/11? And when they put it on Linden Lane, none of them knew that Wells had chosen Boston College because of Linden Lane. So, there's almost a certain kind of symmetry to that, and a certain kind of feeling that there is a higher power that is architecting and orchestrating these things, because we're just not smart enough as human beings to do it. Not that way. Not that way, right? So there's a certain kind of sense of maybe healing that comes from realizing that there was a bigger impact and message here in the midst of what was such a very, very difficult tragedy.
Yeah, and that opens the door to ask him the question you wanted to ask him,
What was it?
which is, what is your faith? Do you have a faith?
Oh, yeah.
I do. So I grew up in the Baptist tradition.
Okay.
And yet I can honestly tell you that as the years have moved on, and I make a distinction between religion and faith and spirituality. I think that I feel like a lot of religion is kind of man's creation, especially now. There's churches I visit and I don't hear a whole lot about the word of the Lord. I hear a lot of me first. I hear, things that just don't speak to my faith and certainly don't speak to my spirituality. I don't have any explanation for my life other than of faith. There's no explanation for it other than that. I was a third generation to be orphaned. I had been orphaned. My father had been orphaned. My grandfather had been orphaned. My mother passed away at 40. My grandmother passed away at 40. Her mother before 40. I mean, I was just the next generation up, it seemed, for this inheritance. And it's not the kind of inheritance you would want. And yet it's come to an end. It's come to an end. And I take enormous joy in that. I don't have quite the vocabulary to express the joy I have in knowing that a cycle came to an end. And yet on the other hand, I think, it's because of those people who came into my life, who helped that cycle end, most times not knowing, that they did. When I wrote the young reader version of A Chance in the World for children 4th through the 6th grade, I got the opportunity to talk about faith, which you have to change your language because you're talking to 4th, 5th, and 6th graders, right? How do you explain faith to a 4th, 5th, 6th grader? And I talked about the foster family I was with went to great lengths to make sure that I was not around anything that was kind, caring, supportive, very purposeful. And I went to church one time in my entire childhood, Bethel AME in downtown New Bedford. And, that day unleashed an approach to faith that I still have. I was placed in a Sunday school class with kids who are much younger than me. But before that happened, I walked into the sanctuary. I walked down between the pews. We all did. So all the children were gathered in the church and we all walked to the front of the church. And then when you turn around and face the congregation, but I am transfixed on the podium. And because it's one above us and it's elevated, so I'm kind of looking up at it. And, you're that age, everything's large, of course. And over the top, behind the podium was a cross. And over the cross were the words, "God is love." The reason I'm transfixed by this is because Willie Robinson, the foster father, who was more like my tormentor, had built that cross He had built that cross. It was part of his facade, part of that family's facade. Now, I remember thinking as an 8-year-old boy in that moment, I'm in a really tough spot because they have God fooled too. That was my reaction. That not even God knows what's happening to me. And, you know, so that you can imagine the path that could send you down, right? If you think that not even God knows. And yet, you know, joy comes in the morning, or in this case, in the form of a Sunday school teacher. The congregation applauds because, you know, they want to welcome us to the church. We go down to Sunday school. That's when we were separated. That's when I find myself in a class with kids who are 4 and 5 years old. And the Sunday school teacher says, let's all bow our heads in prayer. And I put my hand up and I said, how do you do that? And the kids laughed and snickered. And she said, now class, I don't think that's what he's really asking. And then she looked at me and she said, is it? And I said, no, ma'am. And she said, well, you talk to God as if he is your best friend. And I said, well, will anybody else hear you? Because I was concerned about the foster family hearing what I might talk to God about. And she says, no, nobody but you and God know what you talk about. And besides, she says, he already knows what you want to talk about.
Oh boy, that was great.
Yes, yes. So you imagine that sitting in front of that pulpit, God is fooled. God is fooled. And that could have led to a dissent, right? Could have led to self-destructive behaviors, could have led to a whole series of things. But that one Sunday school teacher who I never knew her name, don't even remember what she looked like, don't remember anything about her. See, that's a Lighthouse moment. And she does not know, even to this day, that interaction with me, which she almost certainly has forgotten, changed everything in my childhood. Because from that point on, that's what I did. I prayed and I talked to God like he was my best friend.
Amazing.
That's so beautiful. I mean, I was thinking all day, I wanted to, whenever I think, I want to ask you, what's the difference? Because there's so many kids that grow up like you in an abusive homes or foster homes, and they grow up angry and rightly so. Yeah. And then to perpetuate that history, like you said, your third generation, and what is the difference between you and those other kids? And then I answer it myself, the lighthouse.
Exactly.
Lighthouses that show up in your life.
But you
And, you
also
know, and to do
a
that, you
very-
have to reject the idea of the exceptional one. You have to me, you have to reject that idea. And I am always on guard about that, especially when I was in Hollywood and talking with them about adapting the book to a movie, because I wanted to put on the screen something that would speak to the power of the ordinary people. In this case, that was John. You know, that was John. I mean, John was the one who, in his own way, and in a very different kind of way, you know, bent the arc, right? I look at my father. My father did not have that in his life. You know, he had people who I think try to take advantage of his quote unquote celebrity. He was deeply hurting. He lost his mother at 14 years old. And then he winds up in a juvenile home, not because he's a bad kid, but because he's committed the great crime of watching his mother die. That was what he did. That was wrong. My mother, an inheritor of alcoholism. Her mother was an alcoholic. She was. Her father was away at war while she's being raised by an alcoholic mother. My mother didn't ask for that. She didn't say, let me sign my name to that. And there was nothing to balance that out on the other end. And that's what I did have, fortunately. I would also say that the single most important thing that we can do in our ordinariness when we encounter those situations is to deliver as best we can a different vision than the one that you have inherited. So it's trying to, shift one's mindset. So whenever I deal with a young person and even those who are their advocates, I never talk about young people as at risk, underprivileged, underserved. You've never met a child who'd ever described themselves that way. They want to be a nurse and a doctor and a judge and a lawyer, and she wants to be a CEO, and he wants to be a teacher. Like, children don't see themselves that way, so why should we? And so I've learned, especially with young people, that I'm going to speak to you in the language of your dreams and not of your circumstance.
Ooh,
I love that. Yeah.
wow. Is that the quote that you, Sarah Flatness is saying? Can you repeat that quote again? I think that that's what she meant, that you teach to their
Language of their dreams.
the language of their dreams. That is beautiful.
Well, it's what I've seen, that I think so many young people are looking for. And I've learned that time and time again, that it's what's missing, I would argue, in society today. It's what we're missing. We're missing that sense of, kind of connectedness. I mean, if I always go into most conversations believing that we have some common connection. We just don't know what it is. So we have to work harder to find that, right? So Scarlett, you and I have a common connection in gun violence and losing a loved and the altering and devastating impact of gun violence and what it does. That's so you and I might vote differently politically. We may have different faiths. We clearly have different genders and races. We may feel very differently about a social issue, but it's not the most important thing that you and I have. And even the things that we would disagree on, we'd realize that that's not the most important thing, which I think we've lost in society today. We seem to think that the differences between us is the most important thing about us, and it's not. It's not. It's the story that you can't see from the label: race, gender, faith expression, social issue.
Label. Can you write that down?
Yes.
So good. That's so good. And Sarah's saying there was a quote that started with "deliver." Do you remember what you said when you
I don't.
Okay.
And I think it was recorded, so.
I asked you late, but we're writing down quotes. So
Yes,
fast.
so good.
Stephen, I had a question for you. You were talking about connection, from what you're not, when you grew up, you had no connection. I mean, you were a lot of times alone. You were in a basement alone. Your connection was your books. Your connection was Encyclopedia Brown. You were connecting with other things in your life. You had quote unquote parents that, these people that, just left you kind of on a porch. How do you account for that today of, you have a beautiful wife, you tell the story of meeting Tanya and your children, and, you had no family life, connection, no unity, no almost humanity in a sense. But then you were able to later on connect with John. You were yearning to connect with your family once you started finding your brothers and sister and want to know your life. How do you kind of reconcile those almost like two different types of people, you as a young child and just being so abandoned, not knowing anything, and now you being so connected and reaching out and helping others? Like Scarlett said, not taking the anger and going the opposite way. How do you reconcile that to how you got to where you are today?
In multiplicity of ways. One of them, I would say, is what you said at the very beginning. Because I read as much as I did, I saw intact families. I saw love and kindness and caring and goodness because of what I read. Now, I was not experiencing that, but I knew that it existed in the world because I saw it in the stories that I read. So I literally wanted to, to be Encyclopedia's brother. I wanted to be one of the three investigators. In fact, I fancied myself the fourth investigator, series then in the 70s, Alfred Hitchcock and the Three Investigators. Well, I was a fourth investigator. And I solved mysteries with the Hardy Boys and Nancy Drew. I put myself in those worlds. And because I read as much as I did, it made me a really, really good student. And that's when another, I think, connection was made that, hey, this love of reading you have is making you such a good student. It can also get you to college one day. And then I think as you get a little bit, older, I think we all have, when you lose, in the way that I did, the way that some of you have. The scar is still there. The void is still there. And in the early times, it is as wide as a 6-lane highway, and it almost feels like it's going to devour us. And almost like your life mission is to get that 6-lane highway down to a single country road. It's still there. You still feel the void. You still feel the loss. Life is not the same. I'm never going to have that family history. I'm never going to walk into a room. I'm never going to have a memory of my mother or father. Those things were just denied me. But I see it in my kids though. And Vaughn, our middle boy, who's a freshman in college, and he plays football. Both boys are outstanding athletes. So one plays Division I basketball, the other one plays Division I football. And Vaughn just doesn't call home, man. A kid just doesn't call home. And but he calls his mother today. So I was downstairs, early morning meetings, calls his mom, and he says, and she says to him, Vaughn, you made my day. Thank you so much for calling me. She says, thank you for thinking about me. And he, as I was kind of stepping away, he said, Mom, I'm always thinking about you.
Oh.
Oh.
Yeah. Like, and so here I, who can never say that. I can never say that. And he can. In fact, not only can he, but he does not know any other world.
Yeah.
Isn't that magical? Like, isn't that special?
It's incredible.
Yeah.
And it's incredible what so many of us take for granted, that the family, just having a family, having parents. And
yeah, it's when I hear people complain about growing up in a single parent home, my real reaction to that is I'm jealous. Jealous.
Wow. Right.
Because to not even have had one, right? And not even the memory of one, but I think that's part of that's part of making sure that it doesn't descend into anger, to acknowledge that it hurts, to acknowledge that you do feel the loss of what was not, what was not to be. And it's okay to say it hurts, and that I feel voids. It's okay to say that, because I think if you bottle that, if you don't express that, then I do think it turns inward. Pain has to go somewhere. Pain has to go somewhere. And far too often it turns inward. What did I do wrong? What didn't I see? And those 10 people I wrote about, they all went through something very difficult. And part of the reason I so talked about the pivot, because every single one of them did it. They pivoted that pain into somebody else's possibility. And in part got down into that single country road I talked about earlier.
You talk about pain, and it opens the door for me to ask the question about your foster parents. It was very hard for me to read A Chance in the World, and how they treated you and how they abused you. And I think about it and I'm disgusted and I'm so angry, and I hope I never meet those people. How do you handle that? I mean, did you go back and find out about their past, or, just curious? And do you still sometimes fall back into anger for what you lost and how they treated you?
I'll never understand that kind of depravity. I'm just not capable of understanding it, especially when it comes to a child.
Right.
I just think that there is harm that you do, and I get asked all the time, do I forgive them?
Yeah.
And I've always felt, when you hurt and harm a child, forgiveness is not for me to bestow upon you. Do I have to heal from it? Yes. Now that I have to do, yes. But forgiveness, the scripture is very clear about children, very clear. And I always felt like that forgiveness was something that was going to have to be something that was the Robinsons were going to have to work out with God, you know, not with me. My responsibility was to heal from it.
What is the scripture? I guess I'm not familiar with it.
Generally, you hear the number of references to children.
Okay, so okay, because right, and yeah,
and orphans in particular is what I'm getting at. So the
okay.
word orphan is mentioned 21 separate times in scripture, 21. And in each case, it's mentioned in the context of being the protector. That's our responsibility to the orphan, to be the orphan's protector. And so you see these curious phrases when they talk about the orphan, strength of the fatherless, for example. Odd phrase, isn't it, right? To say that the fatherless or the parentless, they have strength though. And it's our responsibility to nurture that strength. So I always thought that was their greatest crime, was not the abuse as much as it was violating one of God's covenants. And I also thought the next worst thing they did was they did not bring me to my father's family, because they knew who my father was, and they knew that he had a large family, and they should have brought me to his family and said, I know you don't know about this young boy, but this is Kenny Pemberton's son. And forget about the fact that he has blue eyes and his dad has brown eyes. And that's Kenny Pemberton's son. So I always thought that was much more egregious. They have both passed away. Willie Robinson passed away a few years ago, and Reggie Robinson passed away in November, actually, of this year. And I just said, may God have mercy on their soul. That was my reaction. May God have mercy on their soul.
Yeah, I mean, I was not too popular for stating publicly that I forgave Adam Lanza. But for me to go through the process, I kind of felt that it was a letting go.
Yes.
Of letting go of the pain, obviously not the responsibility, but just letting go of the pain and anger and any sort of control that Adam, even though he's dead, would have over my thoughts, that then impact how I felt, that then would impact how I showed up in my relationships and my behavior. And I did not want to give any of my personal power away. So that's how I used forgiveness.
And
But
that's
I also
exactly how
had-
I would describe healing. What you just described is exactly how I'm thinking about healing. You have no power here. You have no power here. And what's been a little bit different for you, Scarlett, though, is what's followed after that, though. Because I never saw coming. I thought that there wouldn't be a single person who would not understand, stand by, support. I never saw coming the conspiracy theorists. I never saw any of that. I was a candidate for the United States Senate in Massachusetts in 2019. And I got into, you got to do these fundraisers all over the country. And I got into a real back and forth with somebody down in Florida over Sandy Hook. I mean, I was very conscious, of course, that I was a candidate, but in that moment, I really didn't care. I didn't care. Because the quasi justification, at one point I said to him, have you ever talked to a parent who lost a child? Have you ever talked to that parent? And he's hemming and hawing. I said, well, the hemming and hawing tells me that the real answer to that is no. You have a conversation, and then you come back to me, and let's see if you feel the same way. But until that time, this is just theory. You've not lived and you've not walked in those shoes. Not walked in those shoes. So you do not know. And, you know, my campaign team was like, oh my God. But that's me. You know, that's me, of course. Now I'm thinking about, though I did not know you at the time, but watching from a distance, because that's not a journey I've walked either. But I can see how to have to live it again and fighting deniers and those kinds of things. But I think you're so right. When you have been wronged and something like that taken, you cannot give away that personal power. It's like the crime gets committed twice when you give your personal power away. And that I will not allow you to do. I felt that way about the Robinsons. When I went back to their home, and I remember this so vividly, my social worker, he was trying to shield me because they were so irrational and so unpredictable. And I literally stepped out from behind him because in my view, they had taken all my personal power. They had taken my dignity, especially earlier that day, and I wanted it back. And my social worker, Mike Sylvia, a good man, he understood that. He never said anything, but he looked at me and he nodded like, I understand why you have to do that. Which I appreciated him understanding that.
And you're right about, I love what you said about just ordinary people being the lighthouses. I mean, I think about John, who was such a broken person and afraid wanting to take you in, but afraid because of his brokenness. And how can I be a lighthouse to somebody when I have, you know, like a major issue? He knew that he did. And yet he said yes, and he did it anyway. And so, in other words, that just tells us that we can never use our brokenness as an excuse. And in fact, it's our brokenness that makes us vulnerable to maybe saying yes, and that anybody can be a lighthouse.
Absolutely right. I had to proceed delicately with John about that. I interviewed him. It was COVID, and I interviewed him via Zoom, like we're talking. So I have the recording of that interview. I had 3 of them, you know, with him. And then I asked him to take me back to the office, and him getting the call from the social worker, from Michael. And now, obviously, John's part of my life, you know, since I was 17 years old. And yet he told me something in that conversation I'd never heard him say before. He said that when he was talking to Mike Sylvia, he says, I'm talking to your social worker. He goes, but I'm also talking to God at the same time. Yeah. And I said, well, what were you talking to God about? I knew what he was talking to Mike about, but I said, what are you talking to God about? And he said, I was trying to convince God that I was not good enough to do what he was asking me to do. He said, that's what I was trying to do. I was trying to tell him, God, you know, I have this demon I'm dealing with. And I can teach, you know, and I love Steve, and I can teach him, you know, but bring him into my home and raise him, and, you know, God, I'm not good enough. And I said, so what was God's reply? And he said, God said, John, you may not trust you, but I trust you.
Wow.
Yeah. So, you know, I lost John the beginning of of 21. I miss him very much, very much. He was just a good man, you know, good man. And, I don't know how life would have turned out had he not been there to take that call, I don't know. I don't know. I would have wound up probably in a group home. I'm not sure I would have gotten to college, at least in the way that I hoped. I did. That's why I dedicated the book to him. Not knowing that I was going to lose him, in the early stage. I'm so glad, though, that I recorded that interview with him, because as it turns out, it's one of the few times, maybe the only time, that I have him on camera, like talking. So, and I'm so grateful, so extraordinarily grateful that the book will allow me to tell his story, So he, who never married and never had biological children, but his time will be marked by virtue of our relationship. And I take enormous satisfaction in that. I miss him every day. I think about him every day in some way, shape, or form. And the memories, of course, are there. But it's still like all of us, you want to pick up and call, and tell them, hey, here's what the kids are doing, or hey, Quinn's playing tonight on ESPN. You can watch him, and hey, let's go to Vaughn's game, road trip. Those are all the things that we had planned to do. So you miss not being able to do those things. But Carly and I were talking about this earlier, and I think John realized that the story wasn't over when I went off to college. So I be honest, I took a lot of, I was being very deliberate in trying to make John kind of like his own kind of celebrity, so, and he can I tell you, he loved it. I mean, we would go to press conferences. I took him to the movie premiere. He was on a panel, and can I tell you, that man would hold court. I mean, he was holding court, and I would sit there and I would say nothing, and I was having such a good time watching this ordinary man's life be recognized and valued.
I love that.
I love that too. And I think about all the disciples in the Bible when they were chosen, and all the times that they said, I'm not worthy. Why would you choose me? I'm nobody, or when God would ask somebody to do something, they would say, I can't do that. Choose him, not me. I can't even speak. And you're asking me to speak on your behalf. That was one story. And I love that he got that recognition too, because he deserved it.
Yeah, me too.
Is John the one that you wrote in the book? I think you went maybe to, I'm not sure where you were going, but you said that you and John looked at each other and he gave you a little nod that said, whatever happens, we're in this together. Do you remember?
That was my social worker.
Okay.
Yeah, no, that was he, and I described that earlier when he nodded at me and said, I don't know what's on the other side of that door, but whatever it is, we'll face it together.
Yeah.
That was kind of the things that are not spoken. John had that same effect too, though. He had that same kind of impact. Yeah.
That security without saying anything, just a nod.
Yes.
Yeah.
FL, who I wrote about as well, FL, and I wrote about him losing his son to a sudden heart attack at 44. And when I was interviewing him, and he said, when you suffer a loss like that, he said, a lot of times people avoid you because they don't know what to say to you, and they know that there aren't any words that will comfort you. So he says they stay away. But I said, well, FL, what should I said, so what should one do? And he said, just stand there and say, I don't know what to say. But standing there sufficient. Standing there sufficient. You don't need to know what to say, but just to be there is important.
Or the best thing that somebody ever said to me was, there are no words, because there aren't.
There aren't. No, nothing magical. You can't say thank God for memories. because, so what are you going to say? No, I wanted more memories. Like, so
Right.
everything that somebody says to you that they think is healing and comforting, you're saying no, because it's the relationship, right? I wanted more. No, I wanted more.
Right.
And so just to say, I don't have the words and I don't have the answers. All I can do is stand here.
Right.
Stand with you.
Shannon wrote in the chat box, your quote, "The crime gets committed twice when you give your own personal power away." So powerful. And it is so powerful.
Yeah, I've seen that. I think that sentiment comes from what I've seen around the Me Too movement, sexual harassment in the workplace. Earlier today, I was reading this story about, again, a voracious reader, and Jerry Lewis, host of the telethon. I mean, a long history of abusing women. My wife and I watched Bill Cosby, the last episode. Same thing. I mean, these monsters, and I don't feel the need to mince words, because that's exactly what they were, and it's exactly how it should be described. That is, and the extraordinary strength and courage of those women, having endured something like that and having to be quiet about it. But those are the women that we see. What we don't see are those who were not able to summon that kind of courage and self-destructed, and a cycle continued. We don't hear as many of those stories, and we should. We should. So, I always felt that way about the Robinsons. I mean, one of my, I just love to defy them people. I mean, I can't tell you the joy I took in defying them. And so the little victories were really important. If I stole food from them and didn't get caught, victory. I mean, that's how I saw it. It was important.
Yeah, and you talk about courage, encouraging, actually. But I loved what you wrote about encourage. The very nature of this definition means that courage is not focused on you, but rather on what you can offer others, and setting the example like those women did encourages others. And of course, that's what a lighthouse does too.
Well, Scarlett, you're a really good example of what I meant by that attribute of the lighthouse. It does take courage to encourage someone else when you have to walk down the paths of difficulty to help them. That takes a certain kind of courage to do that, because you have to relive it again. But you do so, and you're willing to do so. You're willing to show that kind of courage so that I can encourage you. Hearing stories over the years, you come to learn that oftentimes the pain of our past is a present reality for someone else. And they see in our victory the possibility of their own. And that's why it's important to share. It's easy to share the successes, titles, roles. I mean, whatever. That's easy to share. It's a little bit harder to share the times when we weren't so certain, the times when we were down in the valley, when we didn't know what we were going to do or how we were going to do it. And I'm just reminded that people are in that situation like right now. And I've learned that it's okay to be vulnerable and to show that courage, because somebody else needs it in ways that we aren't always cognizant that they do. Rick Rock, as an example, lost his wife literally 2 weeks ago, and I remember that's the call you always remember. It was very tragic, and when he calls and you hear that kind of despair, and you have to be there, part of their circle of support, part of that circle of support. It's just being there, the way that we talked about earlier, being there, trying to encourage as best we can, even if we feel it might not necessarily be making an impact, but it's felt though. It's felt and it's understood too.
Mhm. Anna, do you want to chime in? I know you always have such thoughtful things to say.
Oh, well, Steve, I can't even begin to tell you how you've impacted on my life. So before I start, I just wanted to say thanks to Alexis, because I read your Lighthouse book, which wowed me, and I wanted to read your first book, and I'm in Canada and I couldn't get it. So she sent it to me, and I'm almost finished it. So my niece's birthday is today, and she's in Teachers College. So I sent her the Lighthouse as a present, because I said, you are going to be a lighthouse. And so she hasn't talked to me. So she called me today to thank me. And we chatted a little bit about, I talked about Scarlett and Choose Love, because she's going to be a teacher. And I told her about your story. And I've told these guys a million times about God winks, and everything you've talked about is how many times God winks. But the question I have for you is, it was hard to read your story, and I don't understand how you ended up with such cruel people. Because I have my great niece. She came to me when she was 22 months old, and now she's 14. She's in the other room, and she sees her mom. Because I think biological connection is really important. She has not seen her dad since she was 3, and he called her once when she was 4. So last year, she asked me if she could write him a letter, which she did. 3 weeks later, he responded with about 3 or 4 sentences. And then he texted her, and she hasn't heard from him again. So I was wondering if you had any guidance for me, because my mom died when I was 8. And then when my dad died, I was an adult orphan. So it has all those things. So I loved your 6 lanes into the one little country road, but she's just starting her life. And I'm sometimes struggle at, I don't know what's going on in her little mind, because both her parents are alive. Right. And we don't live in the same city. So just wondering if you could guide me.
Right around that age is when the questions begin. The thoughts probably always there, but the questions, the seeking, right around the 13, 14, that's when it starts. And it's a lifelong process in a lot of ways. I think so many of the messages that she needs, you're already giving her. In the kind of the unstated, the being there, not always, that you're always fully knowing. I do think though that there are some specific things that she needs to hear. That whether it's her father not communicating back to her, that these are not reflections on her. She has done nothing wrong. And you ought to say that to her so much that she says, enough already. In fact, I keep saying that until she says enough already. Because I don't think it's possible to overstate that, because that's part, especially at that age, what did I do wrong? What did I do wrong? And the fact of the matter is that she did nothing wrong. What I came to understand about my own mother and father were that they weren't bad people, but they had some bad things happen to them, and they were not equipped to deal with them. And that might, not knowing the details here, that might be important for her to hear too. So it's not demonizing her parents, but it is acknowledging that they were not there. And she feels because they're alive, this is a choice, that they're not choosing me. What did I do wrong? And that's the first step on a very dark path. You start thinking that I did something wrong. You did nothing wrong. So then why aren't they here? Why aren't they choosing me? Because they encountered some things that were just too difficult for them to overcome and for them to deal with. And I think a third message is, and now is to pivot this now, because those were the circumstances but she did not create those. But she is responsible for the possibilities now. And that may not be fair, but that is the reality. That is the reality. And to remind her continually of the enormous power that she has, she solely, along obviously with your help and support, that she gets to rewrite the story, her own story, not the next chapter of her parents' story, her own story. And that is her superpower. That's her superpower. Now, where she decides to take that is up to her. It could be college, it could be music, it could be entrepreneurship, but she will decide that, but she's going to decide it. Nobody else will decide it. And sometimes I think that's what gets missed in the midst of any difficulties we don't always see. And I would tell her this too, that when you're dealing with adversity, what nobody often tells you is that you're developing a skill set. You have a skill set from having to navigate very difficult situations. So I know, I think very quickly, very quickly. I had to. It was a survival mechanism for me. I'm a voracious reader. Survival mechanism. I don't spend a lot of time dwelling on the problem. I always focus on the solution. Now, nobody tells me, of course, that it's going to make you pretty damn successful, whatever you want to do, right? So I think it's shifting the narrative from one of these forces were imposed upon me to pivoting now to, so what am I going to decide to do here? And I am armed with what I need actually in support and in my own strength to write that story. The ones that I think get awry is they never let go of this. It was me. I was the reason. Mm-hmm. I was the reason they did not choose me. Mm-hmm. And that leads to all kinds of self-destructive behaviors. And then lastly, children don't always listen, but they rarely fail to follow. That takes time, right? But they ultimately follow what they see around them. And so the more experiences that you can put her in where she sees that power she has, and it's not just because you love her as much as you do, because of course you would say that you love her, but she gets in places where she's affirmed. And what you are speaking to her, she begins to feel. She's seen as a leader. She's valued. Those unique qualities that I know she has, they get validated by the environments that you put her in. And you can see that slow, they get taller. There's a little gleam in the eye. They get a little bit of swagger. My daughter, I can tell you, has that in abundance, and I love it. I can even tell you how much I love it. I love it because I know how hard it is, and especially hard when you're a young woman. It's different. It's different. It's different as a young man going through that, as I did, than it is as a young woman. It is different. Yeah, you got another book out of me, but as you can tell, I feel very, very strongly about that. And thank you. Thank you for what you're doing for her is not measurable in this lifetime or the next.
Oh, thank you. Because I guess the part that hurts me sometimes is she doesn't know why he doesn't love her. And those are the questions that I have a hard time answering. But I say, like you say, it's not that your dad and mom don't love you. They just love you in a different way. I don't know if that's a good answer, but I don't know. I don't have the words. I don't have the words to figure out how to tell a little person why their parents not present to love. Mm-hmm. So.
Yeah, I think that, and I understand the place that comes from, but because she doesn't see it, she can't relate to that definition of love, because there's that definition of love as you're describing, then there's the one that she sees every day in you, and that's like not going to ever be the same, right? The more candid answer, and it's exactly how I think about my father, who knew about me and did not choose me either. Is that that was on the one hand a reflection of how he grew up, and there were difficulties that he inherited that he simply did not equip him to love me the way that he should have. And now when you say that, that will be up to you, right? But because that is closer to the truth. That's closer to the truth than not. And some people, as we know, are simply they do struggle with they just might not be capable. They're wounded themselves. They never recover from it, and as a result, they continue that cycle. But I do think that what you're rightly citing as the importance of the love that you're providing her, and as she will absorb that over a lifetime. Like over a lifetime, she's going to feel about you the way I feel about John, right? She's going to feel the exact same way. Probably already does. Yeah.
Well, thank you very much. And then the other one is Mrs. Levin, the lady who saw you reading. I love her.
Oh yeah, if you ever met her, she too passed away. But if you ever met her, you'd love her too. I mean, she little twinkle in her eye. I love telling her story too. I love telling her story. She was as seemingly ordinary as they come. But it's ironic. The reason I found her is because of the impact that she had on that entire neighborhood. Because people knew who I was writing about. Because she did that for a lot of people. Brought old clothes, books to kids in the neighborhood. I mean, that's just what she did. And it's much like the Lighthouse, seeking neither reward nor recognition. And I thought when I sat down with her, and it's why I made it her Lighthouse effect. And I still remember her looking at me, and I said, well, why did you do that? And she gave me the oddest look, like, well, doesn't everybody do that? And I'm like, well, no, Mrs. Levin, no, not everybody does do that. But then I probed a little bit more, and I'm like, well, why? Well, so why did you then? Why did you do that? And boy, that answer, oh yeah, that. She paused for a minute. Yeah, that. Yeah. She had to think about it. She literally had to think about it. She'd been living that way for so long. And then, that's what my mother told me to do. And she was saying it like, the sky is blue, like, that's just kind of what you're supposed to do. Now it comes from the Jewish faith of tzedakah, right? Is where it comes from ultimately. But to her, it was very simple. And yet, in a more profound way, that's largely what we're missing in America today, that spirit.
Absolutely. And you know what? This is going to help. And we're going to push this out. I know that you have really added value and transformed everybody's life on here. And I think even if they didn't get a chance to express it to you, this is such an amazing concept, and it's for everyone. It's not those extraordinary people, it's for ordinary people, and we can all do that. And I loved our podcast that we did together. You're an extraordinary human being. And I knew that I wanted our book club and all of our people to hear you, to meet you, to see you, that you're forever now in the Choose Love family. We love you, and we're just so appreciative of all that you've been through and how you've turned that lived experience and the wisdom that you gained from that into helping others. It's extraordinary.
Well, I can't thank you enough. I knew from our very first conversation that we were going to stay connected. I actually think the subtitle of the Lighthouse Effect should be Choose Love, because that's what those 10 people did. I mean, if you think about it, that's what the Lighthouse does. It does choose. It's a conscious act in the midst of adversity, of choosing. So that I appreciate. I would love to send along, if you wouldn't mind, just as a follow-up. I have what are signed inscriptions, so I can personalize them, and I can send everybody's name, and I'll just mail them. You just send me the names and addresses, and I know that you're in Canada, and I can just mail you the signed inscriptions, and they peel off, they go right inside the book, and it's just my way of saying thank you for this time and for this moment.
Should we show that picture?
Oh, that's amazing. Thank you so much. Yes, we would love that. Yeah. And my mom actually brought something for you.
Oh,
Well, something for you to see.
uh-huh. Oh,
Oh,
oh, that is great.
I love
Isn't
it.
that exactly the symbol of a lighthouse with the turbulent water?
Oh,
It
And yet-
is.
And yet that bird is still kind of fighting the wind there.
Yeah. They aren't they fascinating? I mean, they are just absolutely fascinating structures. And it's
Yeah.
embodied in that picture because you can't sail up to a lighthouse because
No.
it's dangerous
Mhm.
because of the rocks and the
Mhm.
waves and the old reefs and abandoned shipwrecks and yet it's such an amazing. There's no structure like it in the world. And there's no other structure. I find maybe the bridge you could kind of make the argument for, but there's no other physical structure that most resembles humanity and the best attributes of humanity like the lighthouse does, which is why I think it has endured well beyond its navigational use. That's
Mhm.
beautiful.
Mhm.
So
Yeah.
we wanted to send it to you, but actually it's very old. We've had this up in our house for decades, and it is actually a paint by number. It's dated on the back 1969, so it's
You're
a year
kidding
younger
me.
than I am.
Wow, that is amazing.
Yeah. And it's very dusty. I don't think that you would
I
appreciate
dusted
that,
it.
but you dusted it. I mean, it is so dusty. I'm peeling off dust.
Oh.
Make
Okay.
it a character, you know?
Sorry.
And that was done when I was 2 years old. That is amazing. That's
Yeah.
amazing.
Well,
Look,
and
I don't want to take a family heirloom away from me.
It's falling out.
However, I don't care what kind of condition it's in. That so if you want that to find its way to me, and I would hang that as a memento of our time.
I would love that. Yeah, that
Yeah.
would be fantastic.
Yeah, that
Yes.
would be. And I can tell you, I would have never received anything like that. So that is unbelievably cool. Wow.
Oh,
Wow.
good.
Now I
That's
gotta
true.
go tell my wife that story.
Aw,
That's good.
that's really nice. Well, thank you so much,
Thank
Steve.
you.
Thank you.
tonight.
Oh,
Thank you.
Thank you everyone for joining us and for choosing love and loving and supporting us. You're all lighthouses. I know that because you're all here. And we're just so appreciative. So Steve, we'll keep in touch. You're part of the Choose Love family now.
Thank you so much for the time. What a pleasure meeting all of you. I have to fly out tomorrow, and you have me feeling so good. I'm going to fly the plane. I don't know how.
have fun.
Well, you could. We
Yeah.
have faith in you.
There we go. There we go. Awesome.
Thank
All
you
right.
so
That's
much.
wonderful.
Have a
Good
great
night.
night.
Thank you
Thank
so
you.
much, Steve.
So appreciate it.